there's truth up ahead. It gets beyond all the headlines you read. Don't need lip service with a wink and a nod. You need a man on a mission from God. Well, not to worry, here's Bob Enyart Live.
Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. Welcome to Bob Enyart Live. I'm the pastor of Denver Bible Church. My wife Cheryl had a science teacher in high school in Middletown, Ohio, Mr. Rudder. Back in the 1990s, we wrote a skit about what would happen after Mr. Rudder passed away. 5 minutes of him standing before God on Judgment Day. We auditioned actors, then produced the skit and broadcast it. Which year? My producer's asking me which year. When shouldn't you know that? Which year? Shouldn't? It was before we moved the nightly TV show to South Bend, Indiana. I think it was in 1994 or 95, about 23 years ago. Well, sadly, though not unexpectedly, Mr. Rudder, the real Mr. Rudder, about whom the skit was written, he died this weekend. So we thought we'd dig up the skit from the BEL archives and air it. We've got the Pope saying there's no hell, then goes there, right? So we talked about that yesterday. And when Jesus Christ went to the cross, right before he was arrested under false pretenses and then held overnight in this basement cell beneath Caiaphas's complex. If you go to Israel today, Lord willing, we'll be going. In fact, we've got people signing up from around the country to go on another Bible tour. This is in October. When in Rome, do Romans. And Romans is the world's greatest theological treatise, and we have quite a study of the book of Romans. In fact, someone earlier today called in and asked, do you have any resources about what happened after Jesus died on the cross and before he was raised from the dead? Some Christians falsely teach that the devil, Lucifer, was tormenting Jesus. That's false. That's not biblical. But in fact, Jesus did spend 3 days in Sheol, in the place of the dead, and specifically somewhere that the Bible calls Abraham's bosom. And we talk about that, we teach about that in our study on the book of Romans, also, of course, in Ephesians, our study on Ephesians, and in 1 Peter. So absolutely fascinating Bible material telling us about the ultimate issues, the ultimate reality that explains our existence, where we've come from, where we're headed. And when the Pope said there's no hell, what a tragedy. You know, it used to be people would ask rhetorically, is the Pope Catholic? Ha! Not so much anymore, right? That meme has been going around. Well, the Pope, the case against the Pope, we covered some of that yesterday. You can see it on our webpage, kgov.com/Pope. It's absolutely horrific. And the Pope seems to be clearly post-Christian, as so many are. In fact, this Mr. Rudder, Cheryl's science teacher from her high school days back in Ohio, so he passed away. And we wrote a skit about, 5 minutes of him standing before God on Judgment Day. We produced the skit and we aired it way back then, 1995 or so. And now that he's actually passed away, and that's so sad, so devastating, because he was a Methodist, and most Methodist churches are post-Christian. All the United Methodist churches, for the most part. Here, not very far from our BEL studios, we've got the Arvada United Methodist Church, which rejects even the resurrection of Jesus Christ. 2 of our 7 sons attended that church with friends back some years ago, and they went on Easter morning. So imagine going to church on Easter. At Denver Bible Church, we call it Resurrection Sunday. Imagine going to church on Easter and hearing the message from the pulpit. The sermon was about the most embarrassing thing in the Bible, and the pastor of the Arvada United Methodist Church said the most embarrassing thing in the Bible is that it says that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And he said, of course, Jesus never rose from the dead. That's not possible. These guys don't get the idea, right? They don't get the idea of what a miracle is. And in their intense ignorance and their rebellion, their hatred of God, they say, well, back in the past, anciently, men didn't understand that certain things were scientifically impossible, like a virgin conceiving, or a dead person being raised from the dead, or someone walking on water. And they actually argue, and this is argued to this day, by people who supposedly have functional IQs. They say, well, people back then didn't know that these things were scientifically impossible, and how absurd on its face. The reason that people recorded these events back then as miracles, signs, and wonders is because they knew that they were impossible unless God had intervened. That's why they presented these things as evidence of God's existence, of God's intervention in the affairs of mankind. So who is it that is ignorant? Who is it that's guilty of committing logical fallacies? Who are the fools? The people in the ancient past who recorded these things of Jesus Christ, or the United Methodists today who say, well, back then, people didn't know that these things were not possible. So Mr. Rudder attended throughout his life a Methodist church, and until his death, as far as we know. And so this is real sad. Well, what we'd like to do is take the audio from that skit and air it on tomorrow's program. And in fact, we should put the skit itself up on YouTube. Don't you think so? Because you're going to want to see it also. So let's do that. Let's air the audio tomorrow. For folks over the last decades who've purchased our monthly topical video subscription, where they get a different DVD in the mail from us every month, or folks who've gone on our store at kgov.com, clicked on the store, they'll see in our apologetics department, we have a video called Confronting an Atheist, and this skit is appended to the end of that televised Bob Enyart Live TV program, where we confronted an atheist. And so a lot of folks have seen this skit, but it hasn't been broadcast in decades. And so it'll be interesting to do that. Of course, it's too late now for Mr. Rudder. It's too late. He's passed away. It's appointed unto man once to die, and then the judgment, the Bible says. Such a sad thing about false teaching and bad doctrine is that it so confuses people, and it takes Christians to a large extent out of the battle, in the battle for ideas. And we've talked ad nauseum about don't judge, forgive everyone, and how those examples of false teaching have removed millions of Christians from actually having an intelligent influence on the culture, and hopefully that would build up to even affecting public policy. So they have been emasculated by those cliches and so many other baseless, mindless Christian cliches. And similarly, with the claim that God is outside of time, that's a sad one. I had a longtime staffer for a national ministry say to me just about 3 weeks ago that we can pray for the dead. Now, that's a pagan concept, to pray for the dead. And the Mormons adopted it. The Mormon church, it's a pagan church. It's not a monotheistic religion. They believe that not only did God the Son become a man, that's part of their teaching because they've taken the Bible and twisted it into Mormonism, but they also believe that God the Father was once a man and that he became God. See, Christianity doesn't teach that Jesus Christ was a man who became God. It's that Jesus Christ is our eternal God who became a man to save us in the incarnation. But if you teach that God is outside of time, that means he cannot experience sequence, he cannot change in any way. And then also, if God is outside of time, if to him all time is the same, then this longtime staffer said to me, you know, Bob, we could pray for the dead because God is outside of time, and to him they're not dead yet. And so Mr. Rudder is not dead yet if this were true. Of course, this is not true. And if you're curious, just Google, "Is God outside of time?" and you'll find our article. It should be ranked number 1, and it's so powerful. That's, we think, why it's ranked number 1, because so many people have found it and recommended it to their friends to get a new start on understanding the Bible and God afresh by setting aside a lot of pagan philosophy, and how refreshing it is, how rewarding it is. And no, you can't pray for the dead. Don't pray for Mr. Rudder. It'd be a waste of time. Also, it's an insult to God, because where there's life, there's hope, and it's appointed unto man once to die and then the judgment. Once to die and then the judgment. Our telethon is over because it was for the month of March. We did not do very well. In the past, we've been on the air for almost 27 years now, and for the past maybe almost 20 years of this show, we never had a telethon. We did not talk about funds much for many years, but then when we did start having telethons, we would occasionally meet our goal, and that was so encouraging. And this time we missed our goal by a lot. Very difficult. And it's not clear the way forward, but we will press on with everything we have and continue to attempt to reach more and more folks. But quite often, if the message that you have is not popular, it's hard to get people to want to hear the message, to consider the message, to promote the message. And so, undoubtedly, part of our difficulty is because I'm a Bible teacher, an evangelist, and an apologist defending the faith, providing evidence for the resurrection, evidence for our Creator God, the history of the Bible, the history of the nation of Israel, the Exodus, and coming right through to the scriptures that God has given us the evidence, as the New Testament says, that faith is the evidence for things not seen, the substance for things hoped for. So faith is the proper response to the evidence. So that's what we do here at Bob and Enyart Live, and it leads us to promote teachings that are not always popular, to take shots at the golden calves of the Christian community, to expose the falsehoods among many so-called conservative or Republican politicians. And so when you look at the major themes of Bob and Enyart Live and the things that we've taught, the most fundamental are the things we teach about the nature of God, about God's existence and the nature of God. What could be more fundamental than that? In fact, on our website, kgov.com/about, if you scroll down, you'll see our top 12 contributions, which these are, of course, by our own estimation, the 12 most significant contributions to the world that this radio program and our Denver Bible Church have made over these last decades. And they begin with our teaching on the nature of God, who is eternally free and inexhaustibly creative. Therefore, he has an open future because he's not done thinking yet. He's not done creating yet. And his 5 primary biblical attributes of our eternal God are that he is living, personal, relational, good, and loving. And that's all our first contribution, we believe, and that comes across in our various Bible studies and some of our debates on video and written debates. And number 2 is the nature of time and the fact that time is eternal, and our understanding of God and time, and that God exists as the Bible says, not as philosophers say, but as the Bible says, that God exists from everlasting to everlasting. And then it goes on, our contributions on the nature of creation and the young earth, and on the initial calendar of mankind, the 360-day year, and our seminar on hermeneutics, the tools for understanding the Bible, and we present them in a hierarchy. So fascinating. And then the personhood battle, abolish human abortion, and that the unborn child is made in God's image and God's likeness. And then something we call the tree. After the conversion to Jesus Christ through the gospel, then God calls us to live the Christian life by grace. And we explore how to do that in our study called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So fascinating. And that tree, it's just an astounding study. There's an entire chapter about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Bible. It's tucked away somewhere in the middle of the Bible, and the vast majority of Christians are unaware of this chapter. They don't know that there's a chapter in the Bible all about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's in our study, The Tree. It's also in the book, The Plot, which is my life's work. An overview of the Bible is the key to its details. In chapter 8, we have that, the tree, and the entire chapter in the Bible on that tree, whatever happened to that tree. We know what happened to the tree of life, right? It's in the book of Revelation. It's in Genesis and Revelation. So then what happened to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, the Bible tells us what was the fate of that tree too. And then on government, God's criminal justice system, government and political spectrums, terrorism, thinking properly about terrorism, God's command that Christians must judge, the New Testament support for capital punishment, all that. And then morality, of course, on marriage, morality, exposing moral relativism, which includes our warnings on marijuana, homosexuality, public schools, and our promotion of homeschooling. And then finally, economics. Right? That's the 12th most important contribution made by Bob Enyart Live and DBC, Denver Bible Church, the little church that could. It's the church where our members, mostly others, worked tremendously hard, of course, to get personhood on the ballot repeatedly in Colorado, 3 times, statewide ballot. But it's mostly the leadership of Denver Bible Church and the members of the church who were the leaders of the effort to get the personhood amendments on the ballot. And each time we did better and better. What did we do? About double or triple what National Right to Life had always said you can get as a vote to ban all abortion. And they wanted to discourage people from fighting to end abortion. And I think we came close to tripling what they said is the number you can possibly get. So then I'm describing these top 12 contributions of not only Bob Enyart Live, but also Denver Bible Church, including on economics. What is money? Advocating for welfare is sinful. Welfare violates God's enduring command, thou shalt not steal. What is justifiable taxation? How about copyrights and private property like that, intellectual property, and so forth? And we've been mentioning on the show in the last few days what's going on in South Africa, where the black government there is socialist with communist overtones. And they've been laying the foundation for a land grab where they want to take the farms of white Afrikaners. So white farmers are being threatened by the South African government. And we've mentioned that the people there in South Africa should start singing Venezuela, Here We Come, because that's where they're headed, right? They're headed to Venezuela's economy, which of course is a nightmare. The latest news out of Venezuela are the doctors who have been fleeing the country. Now, about half of the doctors who work in the public hospitals, and this is a socialist country for many years, and so today they're public hospitals. When you see photographs of the hospitals today, it looks like they're filming a horror movie and you're looking at the set, a Hollywood set of a horror movie, but it's a hospital in Venezuela. And about half of the doctors working in their public hospitals have now fled the country. They're out of medicines. They're out of the tools that doctors would use for surgery. Oftentimes, the hospitals will tell patients, we can't operate on you unless you bring the surgical tools and the medicines necessary. And the patients look at them like they're crazy. Say, we're supposed to bring our own scalpels? We're supposed to bring our own medication? And the hospital says, yeah, you got to buy it. Try to buy it on the black market. We don't have any. And so that's the latest nightmare in Venezuela. And in fact, doctors also, it's such a criminal society that doctors are being regularly threatened with being killed. Some patients pulling guns on the doctors. In the news, in fact, the Miami Herald has a photograph of a doctor who was just stabbed because the victim's friends didn't think the doctor was doing that good of a job. But that nightmare down in Venezuela, it's an illustration to the world of the horror that comes eventually when you turn your back on God. And so in Venezuela, they've turned their back on God's enduring command, do not steal. We've done that here in America too, and it's tragic. In fact, for the most part, the whole world is socialist. Tonga. My producer just asked me, how about Tonga? In the South Pacific, that little tiny island country of that Christian monarchy in the Pacific, I actually don't know. The king, we had friends of Bob Enyart Live back in the 90s in Hawaii who were very close to the king of Tonga. And I think he passed away now. I think one of his sons replaced him in succession. And so I actually don't know. Sorry, I don't know if Tonga's a socialist nation. But much of the world today is socialist. Karl Marx pretty much won that battle. The Republican Party here in the U.S. is heavily socialist. A conservative, the definition of a conservative in America, is a Republican trying to save a social program started by a liberal. That's what a conservative is here in America. And so in Venezuela, you have an illustration of the horror that comes with rebelling against God. And in this context, it's God's enduring command, thou shalt not steal. So the government has authority to tax people. And the government also has the ability to use force. I mean, it could use force unjustly, but it also can use force justly, as individuals can too. But when the government taxes people in a way that they plunder their own people, then the government and the governing authorities, and all those who advocate, all those who support government policies that have taxation rates that are what God in the Bible shows are tyrannical, then you're guilty of violating that one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal. And when entire generations grow up in cultures where stealing is how the government functions because of high taxation rates. And then the government takes, like in America, the government being socialist, and even from laws and entitlement programs that were established by Republicans, they will take money from even lower middle class and middle class young families who are struggling, and they'll tax them and they'll give benefits to senior citizens, right? Let's say, for example, prescription drug benefits, which came to us as a yet another entitlement program of tens of billions of dollars a year, courtesy of the Republicans and the Bush family. And so to advocate for that, that's sinful because it's a policy that requires violating God's enduring command, thou shalt not steal. The government doesn't have the authority to take money from young middle-class families and give that money to senior citizens. It doesn't have that authority, so the government is stealing. So it's legalized plunder. It's not really legalized in God's eyes, but it's decriminalized plunder. And South Africa's government is socialist/communist. And taking this land from the white farmers, it's simply an extension of the rebellion against God that had become commonplace. And so when people are in rebellion against God, they tend to not be satisfied. They want to rebel more to make it clear that they're even greater rebels than were their parents. And so Venezuela collapsed because they did socialism well, not because of the price of oil, because the price of oil went down all over the world, but Venezuela collapsed. And so we called for, what was it, a year and a half ago, a humanitarian invasion of Venezuela to save perhaps 1 million people from starving to death. And so that crisis continues to build by the day, sadly. And then we have other countries here, South Africa, oblivious to the consequences of their wickedness. North Korea, it's sad that so many conservative, even Christian commentators act as though the only goal is to get them to back off of their nuclear threat. That's it. How about the 25 million human beings, men, women, and children, who are enslaved by a tyrant? Shouldn't that be our goal? To liberate? America has liberated a lot of people around the world. That needs to be our goal, to liberate 25 million men, women, and children. So if we miss this opportunity for war, it will be devastating. It'll be tragic, and that's what seems like. I mean, that's a potential. Hopefully that won't happen. China realizes that they can't predict Donald Trump, and they think Trump really might bomb the daylights out of North Korea and liberate North Korea. And so China would be devastated to lose a communist country on its border. The communists, they don't care that 25 million North Koreans are living in misery. In fact, they prefer that as a support of their worldview. That's what our focus needs to be, not the nukes. May God bless you.